The rain hammered against the windows of the briefing room at Joint Base Lewis McChord, just south of Tacoma, Washington. Captain Sarah "Hog" Mitchell stood at attention near the back wall, her arms crossed, watching the dozen male officers settle into their seats. Some glanced at her. Most didn't. She was used to it by now. At 42 years old, Sarah had spent 20 years in the Army, 16 of them as a combat pilot. She'd flown A-10 Thunderbolts, the Warthogs, as everyone called them, over Iraq and Afghanistan. She'd earned 3 distinguished flying crosses and a Purple Heart. She'd saved countless lives and destroyed enemy positions that threatened American soldiers on the ground. But when she walked into a room, all most people saw was a woman who didn't fit their picture of what a fighter pilot should look like. Colonel Richard Brennan strode to the front of the room. He was a tall man with silver hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He'd never flown combat missions himself. He was an administrator, a paper pusher who'd risen through the ranks by knowing the right people and saying the right things. "Gentlemen," he began, then caught himself. "And lady, let's get started." Sarah kept her face neutral, but inside she felt the familiar sting. 20 years and she was still an afterthought. "We've got a situation developing," Brennan continued. "Weather reports show a major storm system moving in from the Pacific. Category 3 winds, heavy rain, possible flooding in the mountain regions. We're putting together a rescue task force in case any civilians get stranded." He clicked a remote, and a map appeared on the screen behind him. It showed the Cascade Mountains east of the base, with several small towns marked in red. "These communities are particularly vulnerable," Brennan said. "If the storm hits as hard as predicted, we may need to evacuate people from their homes. The roads could become impassable." Major Tom Grady, a helicopter pilot who'd been at the base for 6 months, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the timeline?" "Storm's expected to hit in 36 hours. We'll have teams on standby starting tomorrow evening." Sarah studied the map. She knew those mountains well. She'd grown up in a small town called Pinehaven, about 60 miles east of the base, right in the heart of that red zone. Her mother still lived there in the same house where Sarah had spent her childhood. "Captain Mitchell." Sarah snapped to attention. Brennan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sir, you're from that area, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, Pinehaven." "Good, you can provide local knowledge if needed." He turned back to the rest of the room. "Captain Mitchell will be on the ground support team. She'll help coordinate supplies and communication." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, I'm a pilot. I should be in the air." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "The helicopters will handle the evacuation, Captain. We need experienced people on the ground." "I have more combat flying hours than anyone in this room, sir." The room went quiet. Several officers shifted in their seats. Major Grady smirked. Brennan's face reddened. "Captain Mitchell, I don't recall asking for your opinion on the assignment." "No, sir, but I'm qualified to fly in extreme conditions. I've done it dozens of times." "In a fighter jet, Captain, not a search and rescue bird. The A-10 doesn't exactly have room for evacuees." His tone was condescending, like he was explaining something to a child. Sarah fought to keep her voice level. "I'm also qualified on the Black Hawk, sir. I completed cross-training 2 years ago." "That's noted in your file, but the decision has been made. You'll be ground support." It wasn't a discussion, it was an order. Sarah nodded once sharply. "Yes, sir." Brennan turned back to the map, dismissing her. "Major Grady will lead the air team. Lieutenant Morrison and Lieutenant Chen will be his wingmen. We'll have 3 birds in the air, rotating shifts if the weather allows." The briefing continued, but Sarah barely heard it. She stared at the map, at the little dot marking Pinehaven, and thought about her mother. Ruth Mitchell was 74 years old, stubborn as a mule, and lived alone in a house that was probably older than Sarah. When Sarah had called her last week to suggest she might want to stay with Sarah's brother in Seattle for a while, Ruth had laughed. "I've lived through worse storms than this, baby girl," she'd said. "This old house has stood for 90 years. It'll stand for 90 more." Sarah had inherited that stubborn streak. It had served her well in combat, but had made her life harder everywhere else. After the briefing ended, Sarah was gathering her notes when Major Grady approached. He was younger than her by 5 years, with perfect white teeth and the kind of easy confidence that came from never being questioned. "Don't take it personally, Captain," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. The colonel's just being practical. This is going to be dangerous flying. Visibility will be near zero, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. It takes a certain kind of instinct. Sarah met his eyes. I've flown through worse. In combat, sure, but this is different. This is about precision, about threading the needle in impossible conditions. It's not just about being brave. The implication was clear. Being brave was all she was good for. I'm sure you'll do fine with the ground team, Grady continued. Someone needs to manage the supplies, coordinate the logistics. That's important work, too. Sarah wanted to tell him exactly what he could do with his condescension, but she'd learned long ago that fighting these battles in the moment only made things worse. Instead, she smiled tightly. I'm sure you'll do your best up there, Major. She walked out before he could respond. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah helped organize supply crates, checked communication equipment, and coordinated with local emergency services. It was important work. Grady had been right about that, at least, but it wasn't flying. Every time she heard a helicopter start up for a test run, something in her chest tightened. That evening, Sarah drove home to her small apartment off base. She lived alone, had for years. Her marriage had ended 8 years ago. Her ex-husband had tired of being married to a woman who loved flying more than she loved him. She couldn't blame him. It was true. She made herself dinner, a simple pasta with vegetables, and ate it while watching the weather report. The storm was intensifying. The meteorologist, a young woman with worried eyes, pointed to the swirling mass of clouds approaching the coast. This is going to be worse than we initially thought, she said. We're now predicting sustained winds of 70 miles per hour in the mountain regions, with gusts up to 90. Residents in the Cascade foothills are urged to evacuate immediately. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her mother. It rang 6 times before Ruth picked up. Hi, sweetie. Mom, are you watching the news? I am. You need to leave, now. Go to Dave's place in Seattle. Her brother Dave was a software engineer, lived in a comfortable suburb with his wife and 2 kids. He'd been calling Ruth too, Sarah knew. Sarah, honey, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not leaving my home. Mom, I've got supplies. I've got water, canned food, batteries. I'll be fine. The weatherman just said winds could hit 90 miles per hour. That house wasn't built for that kind of storm. This house has survived worse. No, it hasn't. Mom, please, just for a few days. There was a long pause. Sarah could picture her mother in the kitchen, the yellow walls she'd painted herself 20 years ago, the old rotary phone she refused to replace hanging on the wall even though she was talking on a cordless now. Sarah, I was born in this house. Your grandmother died in this house. I'm not going to run away because of some rain. Sarah closed her eyes. It's not just rain, Mom. I know what it is, and I'm staying, but I promise I'll be careful. I'll stay inside, away from the windows, okay? There was no point in arguing further. Sarah had inherited her stubbornness from somewhere. Okay, but keep your phone charged. And if anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. I will. I love you, baby girl. I love you too, Mom. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt a deep unease settle over her. She'd felt this way before in combat, in the moments before something went wrong. It was instinct, the kind of knowing that lived in your bones. Something bad was coming. The next morning, Sarah reported to the operations center at 500 hours. The storm had arrived during the night, and the wind was already howling around the buildings. Rain came down in sheets, so heavy you could barely see 20 feet. The operations center was a hive of activity. Radios crackled with reports from local emergency services. Computer screens showed satellite imagery of the storm, a massive spiral of clouds that covered half of Washington state. Colonel Brennan stood at the center of it all, barking orders. First team launches in 2 hours, he announced. Grady, you're on point. Morrison and Chen, you're with him. We've got reports of flooding in 3 towns already. People are stranded on rooftops. Sarah found her station, a desk with 3 computer monitors and a radio headset. Her job was to coordinate between the air teams and the local authorities to help identify who needed rescue and where the helicopters should go. It was important work. It saved lives. But it wasn't flying. At 700 hours, the helicopters took off. Sarah watched them through the window, three black hawks rising into the gray sky, immediately swallowed by the storm. On her radio, she could hear the pilots communicating with the tower. Tower, this is Rescue 1. We're at 500 feet heading east. Visibility is less than a quarter mile. Copy, Rescue 1. Be advised, winds are gusting to 75 miles per hour. Recommend you reduce altitude. Copy that, Tower. Sarah listened, her hands steady on the desk, making notes, updating the computer system with their positions. This was her job now. 2 hours passed. The helicopters reached the first town, a place called Cedar Ridge, and began evacuating people from their homes. Sarah coordinated with the local fire department, marking addresses, counting survivors. Then the radio crackled. Tower, this is Rescue 2. We've got a problem. Sarah's heart jumped. That was Lieutenant Morrison. Go ahead, Rescue 2. We just lost hydraulics, trying to stabilize, but we're losing altitude. Colonel Brennan appeared at Sarah's shoulder. Where are they? Sarah checked her screen. 5 miles east of Cedar Ridge, sir, over heavy forest. Tell them to find a clearing. Get them down safely. Rescue 2, this is Tower. Find a clearing and set down immediately. We'll send support. Copy, Tower, we see a road, attempting landing. The radio went silent except for static. Sarah waited, her breath caught in her throat. Beside her, Brennan was rigid. Rescue 2, do you copy? Nothing. Rescue 2, respond. More static, then faintly, Tower, we're down. Aircraft is damaged, but crew is safe. We're on Route 14 about 6 miles east of Cedar Ridge. Relief flooded through Sarah. They're down safe, sir. Brennan nodded. Get Rescue 3 to their position. Have them pick up the crew. Yes, sir. But as Sarah relayed the orders, her unease grew deeper. They'd just lost one of their 3 helicopters. They were down to 2 birds, and the storm was only getting worse. By noon, the situation had deteriorated. The flooding was more extensive than anyone had predicted. Whole neighborhoods were underwater. People were trapped in attics, on roofs, in second-floor bedrooms with water rising around them. And they only had 2 helicopters. Sarah worked her station, her voice calm and professional as she coordinated rescues, prioritized locations, managed the chaos. But inside, she was screaming. She should be up there. She could be helping. At 1400 hours, the radio crackled again. Tower, this is Rescue 1. We're at capacity and need to return to base. Request Rescue 3 continue operations. Copy, Rescue 1. Rescue 3, you're on point now. This is Rescue 3. Roger that. We're heading to Pine Haven. Multiple reports of people trapped. Pine Haven. Sarah's blood went cold. Rescue 3, this is Tower. What's the situation in Pine Haven? Tower, it's bad. The river overflowed. Main Street is underwater. We're seeing people on rooftops. Sarah pulled up the map on her screen, zooming in on Pine Haven. Her mother's house was on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the river. She grabbed her phone and dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times, no answer. She dialed again, still no answer. Sir, she said, turning to Brennan, I need to. Captain, I need you at your station. My mother lives in Pine Haven, sir. She's not answering her phone. Brennan's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. I understand, Captain, but we have procedures. Rescue 3 will get to everyone, your mother included. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to demand that she be allowed to go up there, but she knew it was useless. Brennan had made his decision. She turned back to her monitors, her hands shaking slightly as she updated the map. She marked her mother's address with a red pin, flagging it as high priority. Rescue 3, be advised, there's a priority rescue at 1425 Maple Street. Elderly woman may be alone. Copy, Tower, we'll get to it. The next 2 hours were torture. Sarah listened as Rescue 3 pulled people from rooftops, from flooded homes, from cars trapped on submerged roads. Each rescue was a victory, but none of them were her mother. At 1600 hours, the radio crackled with Rescue 3's voice. Tower, we're at 1425 Maple Street. House is severely flooded. First floor is completely underwater. No sign of anyone on the roof. Sarah's heart stopped. Rescue 3, can you see inside? Negative, Tower, too much water. If anyone's in there, they're not visible. Check the second floor. There's a window on the east side. Copy, Tower. The seconds stretched into eternity. Sarah stared at the radio, willing it to bring good news. Tower, we can't get close enough. The winds are too strong and we're running low on fuel. We need to head back. Rescue 3, you need to check that house. Captain, we can't. We have other people waiting. We'll come back when. Brennan put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Captain Mitchell, stand down. Sir, my mother. We don't know that she's there. She may have evacuated. We'll send a team back when conditions improve. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time in her career she felt her composure crack. Sir, please let me go up there. Captain, you're not qualified to fly in these conditions. Yes, I am, sir. I'm begging you. Brennan's face was stone. The answer is no. Return to your station. Sarah stood there, her fists clenched, her mind racing. She thought about disobeying, about running to the flight line, taking one of the backup helicopters. But that would end her career, and worse, it might not even work. She'd be court-martialed before she got off the ground. She sat back down, feeling helpless in a way she'd never felt before. Not in combat, not when she'd been shot at, not even when she'd crash-landed in the desert and walked 15 miles back to base. This was worse, because this time she couldn't do anything. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The helicopters continued their rescues. More people were saved, but there was no word about her mother. By 1900 hours, the light was fading and the storm was intensifying. Winds had reached 90 miles per hour. The helicopters were grounded for the night. It was too dangerous to fly. Sarah sat at her station, staring at the red pin on her map. 1425 Maple Street, the house where she'd grown up, the house where her mother refused to leave. Colonel Brennan approached. His voice was gentler now. Captain, why don't you go home? Get some rest. We'll resume operations in the morning. Sarah didn't look at him. I'd like to stay, sir. Sarah, he used her first name, which he never did. There's nothing more you can do here tonight. She finally looked up at him. My mother's out there. I know, and we'll find her, but you need to take care of yourself. Sarah wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that this was his fault, that if he'd let her fly, she could have reached her mother hours ago. But she knew that wasn't fair. He was following protocol. He was doing his job. But so was she, and her job was to save lives. She stood up slowly. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. You made a mistake keeping me on the ground. I could have helped up there. Brennan's jaw tightened. That's your opinion, Captain. It's a fact, sir, and if something happens to my mother because I wasn't allowed to do my job, she paused, swallowing hard, I'll never forgive you or myself. She walked out before he could respond. That night in her apartment, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain hammer against the glass, listening to the wind howl. She kept her phone in her hand, checking it every few minutes, hopping for a call, a text, anything. Nothing came. At 300 hours, she made a decision. She got dressed, putting on her flight suit, lacing up her boots. She grabbed her gear bag and her keys. She was going flying. Protocol be damned, career be damned. She was a pilot and pilots flew. She drove through the storm to the base, the wind rocking her truck, rain reducing visibility to almost nothing. The guard at the gate recognized her and waved her through without question. The flight line was deserted. The helicopters sat in their hangars, dark and still. But there at the end of the line was her bird, not a helicopter, her A-10 Thunderbolt, the Warthog. It wasn't designed for search and rescue. It was a close air support aircraft, built to destroy tanks and support ground troops. But it was tough, could fly in any weather, and most importantly, Sarah knew how to fly it better than anyone alive. She approached the aircraft, running her hand along its armored hull. The maintenance crew had kept it in perfect condition, as always. Sorry, girl, she whispered. I know this isn't what you're made for, but we're going anyway. She climbed into the cockpit, settled into the familiar seat, and began her pre-flight checks. Everything was green. The fuel tanks were full. The systems were online. She put on her helmet and flipped on the radio. Tower, this is Hog 1, requesting permission for takeoff. There was a long pause, then a confused voice came back. Hog 1, this is Tower. We don't have you on the schedule. What's your mission? Sarah took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where she either followed orders or followed her heart. Tower, this is Hog 1. I'm going to find my mother. The silence on the radio lasted only a few seconds, but to Sarah, it felt like forever. She sat in the cockpit of her A-10, her hands steady on the controls, waiting for the response she knew would come. Hog 1 negative, you are not cleared for takeoff. Stand down immediately. It was the tower commander, Major Phillips. Sarah had known him for 3 years. He was a decent man by the book, but fair. Tower, I'm taking off regardless. I'm declaring an emergency. Captain Mitchell, there is no emergency with your aircraft. Return to the hangar immediately. That's an order. Sarah's finger moved to the engine start. Tower, my mother is missing in Pinehaven. The house is flooded. No one has heard from her in 12 hours. That's my emergency. Captain, I understand your concern, but unauthorized use of military aircraft will result in court-martial. Yes, I know. I'll accept that consequence, but I'm going. She hit the switch. The engines roared to life, the sound filling the cockpit, vibrating through her bones. It felt right. This was where she belonged. Hog 1, if you take off, you will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including. I understand, Tower, but I'm a pilot, and right now someone needs saving, and I'm the only one who can do it. She released the brake and began taxiing toward the runway. Through the windscreen, she could see rain pelting the glass, the wind making the aircraft shudder even on the ground. Flying conditions were about as bad as they could get. She'd flown in worse. Behind her, she heard sirens. Security vehicles were moving toward the flight line. They were coming to stop her, but she was already at the runway, turning into position. Hog 1, abort takeoff. That is a direct order. Sarah didn't respond. She pushed the throttle forward, and the A-10 began to roll. Faster and faster, the runway lights blurring past her. The wind tried to push her sideways, but she compensated, keeping the aircraft straight. At 130 knots, she pulled back on the stick. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. She was flying. For a moment, as she climbed into the dark, storm-filled sky, Sarah felt a surge of pure freedom. This was what she was made for. Not sitting at a desk, not coordinating from the ground, but up here, where the only thing between life and death was skill and will. The storm hit her like a fist. The aircraft dropped suddenly, caught in a downdraft, then shot upward just as quickly. Sarah fought the controls, keeping the wings level, trusting her instruments because visibility was 0. Hog 1, you are in violation of direct orders. Return to base immediately, or you will be forcibly grounded. Sarah switched off the radio. She didn't need the distraction. She leveled off at 2,000 feet and turned east toward the mountains, toward Pinehaven. The GPS showed her position, a small green dot moving across the map. Her mother's house was 45 miles away. In good weather, that was a 15-minute flight. Tonight, it would take longer. The turbulence was relentless. The aircraft bucked and shook, the wind trying to flip her upside down. Rain hammered the canopy so hard she thought it might crack. Lightning flashed all around her, brilliant white forks that lit up the clouds for an instant before plunging everything back into darkness. Sarah flew on instruments, trusting the gauges, trusting her training. Her hands moved automatically, making tiny adjustments to keep the aircraft stable. This was what 2 decades of flying had given her, the ability to become one with the machine, to feel its movements as if they were her own. But even with all her experience, this was dangerous. If she made one mistake, if one system failed, she would die. The A-10 was tough, but it wasn't invincible. She thought about her mother, tried to push away the images that kept flooding her mind. Ruth trapped in the attic, water rising around her. Ruth on the roof, clinging to the shingles as the wind tried to tear her away. Ruth already gone, swept away by the flood. No, she refused to believe that. Her mother was strong, stubborn. If anyone could survive this, it was Ruth Mitchell. Sarah just had to get there in time. The GPS showed she was halfway to Pinehaven when the first warning light came on. The right engine was running hot. Not critical yet, but it needed attention. She couldn't do anything about it now. She flew on. The second warning came 5 minutes later. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. That was more serious. If she lost hydraulics completely, she'd lose control of the aircraft. Sarah checked the backup systems. They were functional, but they wouldn't last forever. She needed to get to Pinehaven quickly. Through breaks in the clouds, she could see the ground below illuminated by lightning. Rivers had become lakes. Roads had become rivers. The entire landscape was underwater. She descended to 1,000 feet, low enough that she could make out details. She was over the foothills now, approaching Pinehaven. She recognized landmarks even in the darkness: the old water tower, the church steeple, the high school football field. All of it was flooded. She found Main Street, or what was left of it. Water covered everything. Cars floated like toys. Buildings were submerged to their second floors. She banked left, following the street toward the residential area where she'd grown up. The wind tried to push her into a hillside, but she fought it, keeping the aircraft steady. There, Maple Street. She descended lower, dangerously low, until she was flying just 200 feet above the water. The houses slid past beneath her, dark shapes in the storm. She counted them off: 1,401, 1409, 1417. Even in the darkness and rain, she could see that it was bad. The first floor was completely underwater. The second floor windows were just above the water line. The roof looked intact, but she couldn't see anyone on it. Sarah circled the house, shining her aircraft's landing lights down. The powerful beams cut through the rain, illuminating the scene below. No one on the roof. No one at the windows. The house looked abandoned. Sarah's heart sank. Was she too late? Had her mother already evacuated, or worse? She circled again, lower this time, so close she could have touched the treetops if there had been any left standing. The roar of her engines echoed off the water. And then she saw it, a light, a faint flickering light in one of the second-floor windows. It looked like a flashlight. Someone was in there. Sarah's hands moved automatically. She couldn't land the A-10. It wasn't built for that, and even if it were, there was nowhere to land. But she could do something else. She activated her radio, switching to the emergency frequency that all first responders monitored. Emergency services, this is Hog 1. I have a civilian trapped at 1425 Maple Street in Pinehaven, second floor, requesting immediate water rescue. She waited, no response. The storm was probably interfering with communications. She tried again. Any emergency services in the Pinehaven area, this is military aircraft Hog 1. Civilian trapped at 1425 Maple Street, requesting assistance. Still nothing. Sarah circled the house again, her mind racing. She couldn't just leave, but she couldn't help either, not from up here. The A-10 didn't have rescue equipment. It had guns and missiles, weapons designed to destroy, not save. Think. And then an idea came to her. It was crazy, it was dangerous, it might not even work. But it was all she had. She pulled up, gaining altitude, then turned back toward the base. The warning lights were still flashing: engine temperature, hydraulic pressure, fuel level. The aircraft was protesting, but it would hold together. It had to. She switched her radio back to the tower frequency. Tower, this is Hog 1. There was a pause, then Major Phillips's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. Hog 1, you are ordered to return to base immediately. That's my intention, Tower, but first I need you to contact emergency services in Pinehaven. There's a civilian trapped at 1425 Maple Street, second floor. I've marked the location with my landing lights. Captain Mitchell, you've already violated. I know what I've violated, Tower, but right now there's someone who needs help. Can you make the call or not? Another pause, then Phillips's voice came back, softer. Already doing it, Hog 1. Fire department is dispatching a boat team. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you, Tower. Don't thank me yet. When you land, Colonel Brennan wants to see you immediately. Understood, Hog 1 returning to base. She turned west, back toward the base. The flight back was even harder than the flight out. The storm seemed to sense she was tired, seemed to redouble its efforts to knock her from the sky. The right engine was definitely overheating now, the temperature gauge climbing into the red zone. The hydraulic pressure continued to drop. The aircraft was dying beneath her, but it would make it. She would make it. She had to believe that. As she approached the base, she could see the runway lights through the rain, a line of bright dots in the darkness. The tower gave her clearance to land, and she lined up her approach. The wind shear was terrible. Just 100 feet off the ground, a gust hit her from the side, nearly flipping the aircraft. She fought the controls, compensated, kept it straight. 50 feet, the runway rushed up at her. 20 feet, almost there. 10 feet. The wheels touched down hard, bouncing once before settling. She reversed thrust, slowing the aircraft, finally bringing it to a stop halfway down the runway. She'd made it. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands still on the controls, feeling the adrenaline drain from her body. She'd done it. She'd flown through the worst storm of her career, found her mother's house, called for help. But she'd also disobeyed direct orders, stolen a military aircraft, and potentially ended her career. Worth it, she thought. If her mother was safe, it was worth anything. She shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit. Rain immediately soaked her, cold and hard. Security vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their lights flashing red and blue. Colonel Brennan stood beside one of the vehicles, his arms crossed, his face like thunder. Sarah walked toward him, her back straight, her head high. Whatever came next, she would face it. "Captain Mitchell," Brennan said, his voice cold. "You are under arrest for unauthorized use of military equipment, disobeying direct orders, and reckless endangerment. You will surrender your weapon and come with me." Sarah unclipped her sidearm and handed it over. "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sarah met his eyes. "My mother was trapped in that house, sir. I did what I had to do." "You violated every regulation in the book." "Yes, sir." "You could have been killed." "Yes, sir." "You put this entire base at risk." Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I put myself at risk, no one else, and I would do it again." Brennan stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the security officer. "Take her to the brig, no visitors until I say so." The security officer, a young corporal Sarah didn't recognize, stepped forward with handcuffs. Sarah held out her wrists without protest. As they led her away, she looked back at her aircraft. The A-10 sat on the runway, rain streaming off its wings, its engines still ticking as they cooled. It looked tired, battered, but unbroken. Like her, the brig at Joint Base Lewis McChord was a small facility, mostly used for short-term detention of soldiers awaiting court-martial. Sarah had never been inside before. It was exactly as grim as she'd imagined: concrete walls, a narrow bed, a steel toilet, and nothing else. They took her flight suit, gave her standard prison clothes, and locked her in a cell. The door clanged shut with a finality that made her stomach clench. She sat on the bed and waited. Hours passed. She had no watch, no phone, no way to tell time except by the gradual lightening of the small window high on the wall. Dawn was coming. She thought about her mother. Had the fire department reached her? Was she safe? There was no way to know. She thought about her career. 20 years of service about to end in disgrace. She'd known the consequences when she took off, but knowing something intellectually was different from living it. Still, she didn't regret it. She couldn't. If her mother was alive because of what she'd done, then it was worth it. The door opened. Sarah looked up, expecting Brennan. Instead, it was Major Tom Grady. He stood in the doorway, his uniform crisp and perfect despite the early hour. His expression was impossible to read. "Captain Mitchell," he said. Sarah stood at attention, even though technically she probably didn't have to anymore. "Major. Mind if I come in?" "It's not like I can stop you." Grady stepped inside. The guard closed the door behind him but didn't lock it. They stood facing each other in the small space. "Hell of a flight you took last night," Grady said. "I did what I had to do." "So you keep saying," he paused. "I listened to the radio traffic, the tower recording. You were flying in conditions that should have killed you." "The A-10 is built tough." "It's not the aircraft I'm talking about." Grady's expression shifted slightly, something like respect flickering across his face. "That was some of the best flying I've ever heard about, and I've heard about a lot." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. She'd expected anger, condemnation, maybe even satisfaction that she'd finally self-destructed, not compliments. "What do you want, Major?" Grady pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I want to give you this." He held it out. Sarah took it and unfolded it. It was a printout of an email time-stamped from 2 hours ago. It was from the Pinehaven Fire Department, addressed to Colonel Brennan. Sarah read it quickly, her heart pounding. "Colonel Brennan. At approximately 2:30 hours, we received a call about a civilian trapped at 1425 Maple Street. We dispatched a boat team immediately. We found Ruth Mitchell, age 74, trapped on the second floor of her home. The water was up to her chest. She was hypothermic and exhausted but alive. We transported her to Cascade General Hospital, where she is being treated for hypothermia and exhaustion. Doctors say she will make a full recovery. We were told the location came from one of your pilots. Without that information, we would not have known to check that address. Your pilot saved this woman's life. Thank you for your assistance. Chief Robert Dawson, Pinehaven Fire Department. Sarah read it twice, 3 times. Her mother was alive, she was safe. The paper trembled in her hands. She looked up at Grady, and for the first time in years, she felt tears threaten to spill over. She's okay, Sarah whispered. She's okay, Grady confirmed, because of you. Sarah sat down heavily on the bed, the relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. Thank God. Grady sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. I owe you an apology, Captain. Sarah looked at him in surprise. What? At the briefing and after, I was. He paused, searching for the word. Dismissive. I assumed that because you were older, because you were a woman, you weren't as good as the younger pilots. I was wrong. Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd waited years to hear something like this, and now that it was happening, it felt surreal. What you did last night, Grady continued, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. But it was also the best flying anyone on this base has ever done. You flew through conditions that would have killed me. You found your mother's house in 0 visibility. You marked the location and got help there in time. He paused. You saved her life. It's what pilots do, Sarah said quietly. We save lives. Not all of us can do it the way you did. They sat in silence for a moment, then Grady stood. Colonel Brennan is coming to see you in an hour. I don't know what he's going to say, but for what it's worth, I'm going to recommend you be reinstated. What you did was against regulations, but it was also the right thing to do, and we need more pilots who know the difference. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your mother's a lucky woman, Captain. She raised a hell of a daughter. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the cell, holding the printout, reading it over and over. Her mother was alive. Everything else, the court-martial, the end of her career, whatever came next, didn't matter compared to that. An hour later, Colonel Brennan arrived. He didn't sit down. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression hard. Captain Mitchell. Sir, I've read the report from the fire department. Yes, sir. Your mother is recovering well. I'm glad to hear that, sir. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Sarah waited, not sure what was coming. What you did was reckless, he finally said. You stole a military aircraft, you violated direct orders, you put yourself in danger unnecessarily. Yes, sir. You also saved a life. Not as a soldier, not as a pilot, but as a daughter who refused to let her mother die. Sarah looked up at him. There was something different in his expression now, something softer. I've been in the Army for 30 years, Brennan continued. I've seen a lot of brave things, but I'm not sure I've ever seen anything as brave as what you did last night, or as foolish. I'm still deciding which. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. I could court-martial you, he said. By the book, I should. What you did was illegal against regulations and sets a terrible precedent. I understand, sir. But I'm not going to. Sarah's head snapped up. Sir. I've spoken with Major Grady and several other officers. They've all recommended leniency. They've pointed out that you were facing an impossible choice. Follow orders and potentially lose your mother, or break the rules and save her life. You chose the latter. I can't say I wouldn't have done the same. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You're not getting off without consequences. You're suspended from flight duty for 30 days. You'll receive a formal reprimand in your file, and you'll undergo a psychological evaluation to determine your fitness for continued service. It was more than fair. It was generous. I accept those terms, sir. Good, Brennan stood. You're free to go. A car is waiting to take you to the hospital to see your mother. Sarah stood as well. Sir, I want to apologize. I put you in a difficult position. I forced your hand. That wasn't fair. Brennan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd met him. Captain Mitchell, I made a mistake. I kept you on the ground because I didn't think you could handle the flying. I was wrong. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen, and from now on I'm going to treat you that way. He held out his hand. Sarah shook it. "Get out of here," Brennan said, his voice gruff. "Go see your mother." Sarah left the brig, walked out into the morning light. The storm had passed. The sky was clear, washed clean by the rain. The air smelled fresh and new. A car was waiting for her, just as Brennan had said. She climbed in, and the driver took her to Cascade General Hospital. The hospital was chaos. The lobby was filled with people, storm victims, families, emergency workers. Sarah pushed through the crowd to the information desk. "I'm looking for Ruth Mitchell. She was brought in early this morning." The nurse checked her computer. "Room 312, third floor." Sarah took the stairs, too impatient to wait for the elevator. She found the room and pushed open the door. Her mother lay in the bed, connected to monitors and IVs. Her face was pale, her hair matted. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Sarah, she smiled. "Hi, baby girl." Sarah crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her mother in a careful hug, mindful of the tubes and wires. "Moms, thank God." "I'm okay," Ruth said, her voice weak but steady. "A little cold, a little tired, but okay." Sarah pulled back, looking at her mother's face. "I was so scared." "I know, I'm sorry. I should have left when you told me to." "No, you shouldn't apologize. You're stubborn as hell, but that's what kept you alive." Ruth laughed weakly. "I got that from your grandmother, and you got it from me." "Damn right I did." They sat together, mother and daughter, holding hands. Outside, the sun was rising higher, burning away the last of the clouds. "They told me what you did," Ruth said after a while. "How you flew through the storm to find me, how you marked the house so the fire department could find me." "I'm a pilot, Mom. It's what I do." "You're more than that, Sarah. You're my hero." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, and this time she didn't try to stop them. "You're mine too, Mom." They sat together until a nurse came to check on Ruth. Sarah stepped out into the hallway to give them privacy. As she stood there, looking out the window at the clear blue sky, she felt her phone buzz. She'd gotten it back when they released her from the brig. It was a text from Major Grady. "Colonel Brennan wants to see you tomorrow, 900 hours. Bring your flight suit. You're back on the roster." Sarah smiled. She was going back to flying. But more than that, she'd proven something, to Brennan, to Grady, to herself. She was a pilot. She was damn good at it. And no storm, no regulation, nothing would keep her from doing what she was born to do. Save lives. Sarah spent the next 3 days at the hospital with her mother. Ruth's condition improved steadily. The hypothermia faded, her strength returned, and by the 3rd day she was complaining about the hospital food, which the doctors said was a good sign. During those days, Sarah had time to think about what had happened. The flight through the storm already felt like a dream, something impossible that she'd somehow accomplished. But the consequences were very real. Her suspension from flight duty meant 30 days of desk work. The formal reprimand in her file would affect her chances of promotion. Not that she'd been particularly concerned about that anyway. And the psychological evaluation loomed ahead of her, a hurdle she'd have to clear before she could fly again. But none of it mattered compared to the fact that her mother was alive. On the 4th day, Ruth was discharged. Sarah drove her to her brother Dave's house in Seattle. Ruth had finally agreed that her house in Pine Haven needed major repairs before she could return, and Dave and his wife Susan had insisted she stay with them. "Just for a few weeks," Ruth said as Sarah helped her up the steps to Dave's front door. "Just until the house is fixed." "Take all the time you need, Mom," Sarah said. Dave answered the door, immediately pulling his mother into a careful hug. He was younger than Sarah by 3 years, with their father's dark hair and easy smile. He'd never served in the military. He'd gone to college instead, gotten a degree in computer science, built a comfortable life. Sometimes Sarah envied him that simplicity. Most of the time, she didn't. "Sarah," he said, embracing her after he settled Ruth on the couch. "Thank you for what you did. I'm just glad I got there in time. The news said you flew through the worst of the storm, that you could have died." Sarah shrugged. "The A-10 is built tough." "I'm not talking about the plane, Sarah. I'm talking about you." His eyes were serious, worried. Sarah had spent her whole life being the strong one, the brave one, the one who took risks while Dave played it safe. It was strange to see him looking at her with such concern. "I'm fine, Dave, really." Are you? Because Mom told me you got arrested. Sarah glanced at Ruth, who had the grace to look apologetic. I got suspended, not arrested. There's a difference. But you could have been court-martialed. Could have, wasn't, it's done. Dave shook his head. You're impossible, you know that. I've been told. Susan appeared from the kitchen with tea and cookies, and they all sat together in the living room. For a while, it felt almost normal, a family gathered after a crisis, grateful to be together. But Sarah could see the questions in Dave's eyes, the worry in Susan's expression. They didn't understand why she'd done what she did, why she'd risked everything for a mother who could have evacuated but chose not to. They didn't understand because they weren't pilots. They didn't know what it was like to see a problem and know you're the only one who can fix it. They didn't know what it was like to sit on the ground, helpless, while someone you loved was in danger. Sarah left that evening, promising to visit again soon. As she drove back to her apartment near the base, she felt the weight of exhaustion settling over her. She'd barely slept in 4 days, running on adrenaline and coffee. Her apartment felt cold and empty when she walked in. She heated up a frozen dinner, ate it without tasting it, and fell into bed. She slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, it was late afternoon. She checked her phone and found a dozen messages. Most were from other pilots on base, sending congratulations or support. A few were from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number, asking for interviews about her heroic rescue flight. She deleted those without responding. The last thing she wanted was to be on the news. One message stood out. It was from Colonel Brennan. Captain Mitchell, report to my office tomorrow at 900 for your psychological evaluation. Dr. Patricia Woods will be conducting the interview. Be prepared for a thorough assessment. Sarah stared at the message. This was it, the final hurdle. If she passed, she'd be back on flight duty in 30 days. If she failed, her career was over. She'd never been good at talking about her feelings. That was part of what had ended her marriage. Her ex-husband had begged her to open up, to share what she was thinking, to let him in. But she'd built walls around herself, walls that kept her safe in combat but isolated everywhere else. Now she'd have to tear those walls down, at least enough to convince a therapist she was fit to fly. The thought terrified her more than the storm had. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Colonel Brennan's office at 8:45. She wore her dress uniform, her ribbons and medals gleaming. If she was going to be judged, she'd make sure they remembered who she was. Brennan's secretary, a middle-aged civilian named Carol, smiled at her. Go on in, Captain. The doctor is already here. Sarah knocked once and entered. Brennan sat behind his desk, his expression neutral. Beside him was a woman Sarah didn't recognize, Dr. Patricia Woods, presumably. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Captain Mitchell, Brennan said, this is Dr. Woods. She'll be conducting your evaluation. Doctor, Sarah said, nodding. Please sit down, Captain, Dr. Woods said. Her voice was gentle, the kind that probably put most people at ease. Sarah sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Brennan stood. I'll leave you two to talk. Doctor, my office is yours for as long as you need. After he left, Dr. Woods pulled her chair around the desk so she was sitting across from Sarah rather than behind the desk. It was a small gesture, but Sarah recognized it for what it was, an attempt to make this feel less like an interrogation and more like a conversation. Captain Mitchell, let me start by saying this isn't an adversarial process. I'm not here to trip you up or find reasons to ground you. I'm here to make sure you're mentally fit for duty. That's all. Sarah nodded. I understand. Good, so let's start with the obvious question. Why did you disobey direct orders to fly into the storm? Sarah had known this question was coming. She'd rehearsed her answer a dozen times, but now, sitting here, the rehearsed words felt hollow. My mother was in danger, she said simply. I'm a pilot, I could help, so I did. You understand that many people would consider what you did reckless, that you put your life at risk for someone who chose not to evacuate. I understand that's how it looks. How do you see it? Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. My mother is 74 years old. She's lived in that house her entire life. When the storm came, she didn't leave because she was stubborn, but that stubbornness is also what kept her alive while she waited for help. I knew that if anyone was going to survive in those conditions, it was her. I just had to find her. And you were willing to risk your career. potentially your life to do that. Yes. Why? Sarah met the doctor's eyes. Because she's my mother, because I'm a pilot, because I could help and no one else could. It wasn't a complicated decision. Dr. Woods made a note on her tablet. Tell me about your relationship with your mother. For the next hour, Sarah talked. She talked about growing up in Pinehaven, about her father who died when she was 12, about how Ruth had raised 2 kids on a waitress's salary and never once complained. She talked about the day she'd told her mother she was joining the army, how Ruth had cried but then helped her pack. She talked about the letters they'd exchanged during her deployments, about the phone calls that kept her sane during the worst days in Iraq and Afghanistan. She talked about how Ruth had been there when Sarah's marriage fell apart, how she'd let Sarah cry on her shoulder without judgment. She's the strongest person I know, Sarah said, and I couldn't let her die, not when I could stop it. Dr. Woods nodded slowly. Captain, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. If you'd been ordered to fly into that storm, if Colonel Brennan had sent you instead of keeping you on the ground, would you still have the same nightmares about what could have gone wrong? Sarah blinked. I don't have nightmares. Are you sure? Because Major Grady mentioned that you've been flying combat missions for 16 years. That's a lot of close calls, a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. Most pilots develop some form of PTSD. I'm fine. Captain Mitchell, I need you to be honest with me. I can't clear you for duty if I think you're suppressing trauma. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She'd expected questions about the storm, about her decision-making, about whether she'd do it again. She hadn't expected this. I sleep fine, she said. I don't have flashbacks, I don't have panic attacks, I'm not traumatized. But you're also not married anymore. You live alone. You don't have many close relationships. That's a pattern I see often in soldiers who have seen combat. They isolate themselves because it feels safer. Or maybe I just like my own company. Maybe, or maybe you've built walls around yourself because it's easier than dealing with the things you've seen and done. Sarah stood abruptly. With respect, doctor, I came here for an evaluation about the storm flight, not a therapy session about my entire life. Dr. Woods didn't stand. She just looked up at Sarah with those kind, patient eyes. Captain, please sit down. Sarah remained standing. Are you going to clear me for duty or not? I'm trying to determine that, but I need you to work with me. By digging into my personal life, by suggesting I'm traumatized because I don't have a husband anymore. No, by helping me understand if you're making decisions out of clear judgment or out of unprocessed guilt. That stopped Sarah, guilt. Sit down, please. Sarah sat slowly. Dr. Woods leaned forward. Captain, you've spent 16 years in combat. You've saved countless lives. But I'm willing to bet you've also lost people. People you couldn't save, no matter how good a pilot you were. And I think that when your mother was in danger, you weren't just trying to save her. You were trying to save all the people you couldn't save before. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. She wanted to deny it, to tell the doctor she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Because Dr. Woods was right. There was a convoy, Sarah heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. In Afghanistan, 2018, they got hit by an IED and Taliban fighters ambushed them. I was flying close air support supposed to keep them safe. She paused, the memory flooding back. She'd pushed it down for years, locked it away where it couldn't hurt her. I took out the enemy positions, she continued. I did everything right, but there were too many of them and they were too close. By the time reinforcements arrived, 4 soldiers were dead. That wasn't your fault, Dr. Woods said gently. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But there's a part of me that keeps asking, what if I'd been faster? What if I'd seen them sooner? What if I'd made different choices? And when your mother was in danger, you saw a chance to make different choices. Sarah nodded, feeling tears threaten. She blinked them back. I couldn't save those soldiers, but I could save her. I had to. Dr. Woods made another note. Captain Mitchell, what you did during the storm was incredibly brave. It was also incredibly reckless. But I don't think you did it out of unprocessed trauma or poor judgment. I think you did it because you're a pilot who knows how to assess risk and act on it. That's what makes you good at your job. So you'll clear me. On one condition. What's that? You see me for counseling, once a week for the next 3 months. Not because I think you're broken, but because I think you're carrying weight you don't need to carry. Let me help you put some of it down. Sarah wanted to refuse. She didn't need therapy. She was fine. But she thought about Dave's worried expression, about the empty apartment she went home to every night, about the walls she'd built around herself. Maybe she wasn't as fine as she thought. Okay, she said, once a week. Dr. Woods smiled. Then I'm clearing you for duty. After your suspension ends, you can return to flight status. Relief washed over Sarah like a wave. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got 3 months of hard conversations ahead of us. Sarah left the office feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd passed. She'd be flying again in 30 days. But more than that, maybe, just maybe, she'd start to heal. The next few weeks passed slowly. Sarah returned to her desk job, coordinating logistics and managing supplies. It was important work, but every day she watched the helicopters take off and felt the ache of being grounded. She attended her weekly sessions with Dr. Woods. They were difficult, exhausting conversations that left her drained, but they also helped. Slowly, she started to understand the weight she'd been carrying, started to see how the years of combat had shaped her in ways she hadn't recognized. On day 25 of her suspension, Colonel Brennan called her into his office. "Captain Mitchell, have a seat." Sarah sat, wondering what this was about. She'd followed every rule, completed every task assigned to her. She hadn't put a foot wrong. "I've been reviewing your file," Brennan said. "Your service record is exemplary. 3 distinguished flying crosses, a Purple Heart, 16 years of combat flying. You're one of the most experienced pilots on this base." "Thank you, sir." Which is why I'm disappointed that it took a near disaster for me to recognize that. Sarah blinked, "Sir." "I made a mistake, Captain. When the storm hit, I should have had you in the air. You were the best qualified pilot for those conditions, but I let prejudice cloud my judgment. I saw a female pilot approaching the end of her career, and I assumed you weren't up for the challenge." "I appreciate that, sir." "I'm not looking for appreciation, Captain. I'm telling you that I was wrong, and I'm making changes because of it. As of next week, when your suspension ends, you'll be leading the Advanced Weather Flying Training Program." Sarah's heart jumped, "Sir." "We need pilots who can fly in extreme conditions. Who better to teach them than someone who flew through a Category 3 storm and lived to tell about it?" It was a promotion in all but name. More responsibility, more respect, more recognition. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good, because there's one more thing." Brennan pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "This came from the Pentagon yesterday." Sarah opened it. Inside was an official letter, dense with military terminology. But the key words jumped out at her. Air Medal with Valor, extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, heroic actions that saved a civilian life. She was being awarded a medal for the storm flight. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You earned it. The ceremony is in 2 weeks. Your family is invited." After she left Brennan's office, Sarah walked out onto the flight line. The afternoon sun was warm and the sky was clear. An A-10 was taking off, its engines roaring, climbing into the blue. She watched it go, feeling something settle into place inside her. She'd been tested, had faced her fears, had broken the rules when breaking them was the only right choice. She'd paid a price for it, but she'd also proven something, to Brennan, to Grady, to everyone who doubted her. She'd proven she was one of the best. And in 5 days, she'd be back in the sky where she belonged. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "How did it go with the colonel?" Sarah smiled and typed back, "I'm flying again in 5 days, and they're giving me a medal." "That's my girl. I'm proud of you, baby." "I'm proud of you too, Mom. You're one tough lady." "I learned from the best. Your grandmother would be so happy to see what you've become." Sarah looked up at the sky, watching the A-10 disappear into the distance. "I hope so, Grandma," she whispered. "I really hope so." The medal ceremony took place on a crisp October morning, 2 weeks after Colonel Brennan had informed Sarah of the award. The base parade ground was filled with soldiers in dress uniforms, families seated in folding chairs, and a small platform decorated with the American flag and the Army colors. Sarah stood at attention in the front row, her dress uniform immaculate, her shoes polished to a mirror shine. To her left stood 3 other soldiers receiving awards that day. To her right stood Major Tom Grady, who'd been asked to present her medal. In the audience, she could see her mother, her brother Dave, his wife Susan, and their 2 kids. Ruth looked healthy now, strong, the ordeal of the storm fading into memory. She wore a blue dress and a proud smile that made Sarah's chest tight. Colonel Brennan stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to recognize extraordinary service by members of this command. These soldiers have demonstrated the core values of our Army: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage." The ceremony proceeded with military precision. The first 3 soldiers received their awards: an Army Commendation Medal, a Meritorious Service Medal, and a Bronze Star. Each recipient stood at attention while their citations were read, while their medals were pinned to their uniforms, while the audience applauded. Then it was Sarah's turn. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," Brennan announced. Sarah marched forward, executed a perfect about-face, and stood at attention facing the audience. Major Grady stepped forward with a display case containing the Air Medal with Valor. He opened it, revealing the bronze medal hanging from its blue and orange ribbon. Brennan began reading the citation. "The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, has awarded the Air Medal with Valor device to Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight during the severe weather emergency of September 15, 2025. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral, but inside she felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pride, yes. Relief, but also something else. A nagging feeling that she didn't entirely deserve this recognition for doing what any decent pilot would have done. Captain Mitchell, demonstrating exceptional courage and superior airmanship, piloted an A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft through dangerous weather conditions with near-zero visibility and extreme turbulence. Despite the significant risk to her own safety and the explicit danger of the mission, Captain Mitchell successfully located a civilian trapped by flooding and coordinated rescue efforts that directly saved that civilian's life. The audience applauded. Sarah saw her mother wiping tears from her eyes. Captain Mitchell's actions reflect great credit upon herself, the Army, and the United States of America. Grady stepped forward and pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform. Then he stepped back and saluted. Sarah returned the salute, executed another about-face, and returned to her position in line. The ceremony concluded with the national anthem. When it ended, the audience dispersed, and families rushed forward to congratulate the recipients. Ruth reached Sarah first, pulling her into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you, baby." "Mom, you're going to wrinkle my uniform." "I don't care, let me be proud." Dave clapped Sarah on the shoulder. "Nice job, sis, that was something." His kids, Emma and Jake, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. Emma, who was 9, touched the medal gently. "Aunt Sarah, are you a hero now?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. "No, sweetie, I'm just a pilot who did her job." "But you saved Grandma." "I helped, a lot of people helped. The fire department, the paramedics, the people at the hospital. That's how rescue works, everybody helps." Jake, who was 7, tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Can I fly in your plane sometime?" Sarah laughed. "Maybe when you're older, much older." As they talked, Sarah noticed Colonel Brennan approaching with another officer she didn't recognize. The man was tall, in his 50s, with a chest full of ribbons and the insignia of a brigadier general. "Captain Mitchell," Brennan said, "I'd like you to meet General Robert Hayes. He's here from CENTCOM." Central Command. That was the unified combatant command responsible for operations in the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of South Asia. Sarah came to attention. "Sir." General Hayes extended his hand, and Sarah shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp. "Captain Mitchell, congratulations on your award. That was some impressive flying." "Thank you, sir. Colonel Brennan has been telling me about your service record. 16 years of combat flying, multiple deployments, exceptional ratings from every commander you've served under. I've been fortunate to serve with good people, sir. I'm here because we have a situation developing that requires your particular skill set." Sarah glanced at Brennan, who gave a slight nod. "What kind of situation, sir?" "Not here," Hayes said, his voice lower. This is a family day. Enjoy it. But tomorrow morning, 800 hours, I'd like you to report to Colonel Brennan's office for a briefing. Bring your security clearance paperwork. Yes, sir. Hayes smiled. Enjoy the rest of your day, Captain. You've earned it. He walked away, leaving Sarah wondering what the hell that was about. Ruth, who'd been standing close enough to overhear, looked worried. Sarah, what did he want? I don't know, Mom, but I'll find out tomorrow. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities. CENTCOM meant overseas deployment, but she'd just been awarded a medal, just been given a new training assignment. Why would they pull her away from that? Unless they needed someone with specific experience. Someone who could fly in extreme conditions. Someone expendable enough that if the mission went wrong, it wouldn't be a political disaster. Someone like her. She arrived at Brennan's office at 7:55 the next morning. General Hayes was already there, along with two other officers Sarah didn't recognize, a colonel from the Air Force and a Navy commander. Captain Mitchell, please sit down, Hayes said. Sarah sat. The atmosphere in the room was tense, formal. Hayes pulled up a map on the wall screen. It showed the Middle East, with several areas marked in red. Captain, what I'm about to tell you is classified top secret. You will not discuss this briefing with anyone who doesn't have the appropriate clearance. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. 3 weeks ago, we received intelligence that a terrorist cell operating in northern Syria has acquired surface-to-air missiles. These aren't the old Soviet-era weapons we've been dealing with. These are new, sophisticated systems that can target aircraft at high altitude. He clicked the remote, and the map zoomed in on a specific region. 2 days ago, one of our surveillance drones was shot down. Yesterday, a coalition helicopter narrowly avoided being hit. The situation is escalating, and we need to take out these missile sites before they kill American or Allied pilots. With respect, sir, what does this have to do with me? The missile sites are located in a region with extremely difficult terrain and unpredictable weather patterns. High winds, dust storms, limited visibility. The kind of conditions that make most pilots nervous. Understanding dawned, but not A-10 pilots. Exactly. The Warthog was built to fly low and slow, to operate in terrible conditions, to take damage and keep flying. And we need a pilot who's proven they can handle the worst weather can throw at them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was it, a real mission, a chance to make a difference. What's the timeline, sir? You'd deploy in 1 week. The mission itself would be a quick strike, in and out in 48 hours. But the conditions will be dangerous, possibly more dangerous than your storm flight. I can handle it, sir. I believe you can, but there's one complication. Of course there was. The target area is in a politically sensitive region. If this mission goes wrong, if you're shot down or captured, the fallout could be significant. The Pentagon is nervous about sending anyone high profile. Sarah understood immediately. But I'm not high profile. I'm just a captain with a medal no one outside the military knows about. Hayes nodded. Exactly. If something happens to you, it's a tragedy, but it's not a political crisis. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's the reality. Sarah had been in the military long enough to understand how these decisions were made. Some lives were more valuable than others, not in any moral sense, but in terms of political consequences. A general getting killed made headlines. A captain, barely a footnote. I understand, sir, and I'm still volunteering. You don't have to. This is voluntary. If you say no, there will be no consequences. Sarah thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. This was what she'd trained for her entire career. This was why she'd become a pilot in the first place, to make a difference, to protect people, to do the difficult things that needed doing. I'm in, sir. Hayes smiled. I thought you might say that. Colonel Brennan will brief you on the operational details. You'll have a week to prepare, and then you'll fly out to the staging area. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics, support personnel, rules of engagement. When it finally ended, Sarah left the office feeling energized in a way she hadn't felt in years. This was it. This was why she'd endured the prejudice, the doubt, the constant battle to prove herself. Because when it mattered, when they needed the best pilot for the worst conditions, they'd thought of her. She called Dr. Woods that afternoon. Captain Mitchell, this is a surprise. We're not scheduled to meet until Thursday. I know, Doctor, but something's come up and I wanted to tell you before I left. There was a pause. Left. I've been assigned to a mission, overseas. I can't give you details, but I'll be gone for about 2 weeks. Another pause. Sarah could almost hear Dr. Woods's mind working, processing. Captain, we've made good progress in our sessions. I'm concerned about interrupting that progress. I know, but this is important. This is what I do. Is this voluntary? Yes. And you're certain you're doing this for the right reasons, not to prove something, not to run from difficult emotions. Sarah had asked herself the same question. I'm doing it because I'm the best person for the job, because people will die if someone doesn't stop these missile sites, because this is what I trained my whole life to do. All right, but Captain, be careful, not just physically. Emotionally, you've made good progress, but you're still vulnerable. Combat situations can trigger things we haven't fully processed yet. I'll be careful, I promise. Good luck, Captain. Come back safe. Sarah spent the next week in intensive preparation. She studied maps, learned about the terrain, practiced emergency procedures. She flew training missions in conditions designed to simulate what she'd face overseas: high winds, dust storms, limited visibility. She was ready. 2 days before her deployment, she drove to Seattle to say goodbye to her family. Dave and Susan made dinner, and Sarah played with Emma and Jake, trying to be present even though her mind was already halfway around the world. After the kids went to bed, Sarah sat with her mother on the back porch. The night was cool, the sky clear and full of stars. You're going somewhere dangerous, Ruth said. It wasn't a question. I can't talk about it, Mom. You don't have to. I can see it in your eyes. You have that look you used to get before your deployments, excited and scared and determined all at once. Sarah smiled. You know me too well. I'm your mother, it's my job. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crickets, watching the stars. Are you afraid? Ruth asked. Sarah considered lying, but her mother would see through it. A little, but mostly I'm ready. This is what I do, Mom. This is who I am. I know, and I'm proud of you, but I'm also terrified every time you go up in that plane. Do you know what it's like waiting to hear if you're safe? Watching the news, wondering if that crashed aircraft is yours. I'm sorry, Mom. I know it's hard. Don't apologize. I wouldn't want you to be anyone other than who you are, but promise me something. What? Promise me you'll come back. I just got you back from that storm. I'm not ready to lose you again. Sarah took her mother's hand. I promise, Mom, I'll come back. It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, but she made it anyway. The next day, Sarah reported to base for final preparations. She said goodbye to Colonel Brennan, to Major Grady, to the other pilots she'd flown with over the years. That night, she packed her gear: flight suit, helmet, survival kit, personal items. She packed the medal her mother had given her when she graduated from flight school, a small silver compass with the inscription, "May you always find your way home." She planned to do exactly that. The transport flight left at 400 hours. Sarah climbed aboard the C-17, found a seat among the cargo and other personnel, and settled in for the long flight overseas. As the aircraft climbed into the pre-dawn sky, Sarah looked out the small window at the lights of the base below, growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared. She was going to war again. And this time, she was going to prove once, and for all, that she was the best pilot the Army had. The forward operating base in northern Iraq was exactly what Sarah expected: a collection of prefab buildings surrounded by concrete barriers, guard towers, and coils of razor wire. The desert stretched out in every direction, flat and brown and hostile. The temperature, even at 600 hours when she arrived, was already climbing toward 90 degrees. She was met by a young lieutenant named Marcus Foster, who looked like he'd been deployed for about 6 months and hadn't slept for most of it. Captain Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Foster. I'll be your liaison during your time here. Good to meet you, Lieutenant. Your aircraft arrived yesterday. Maintenance has been going over it, making sure everything's ready. Colonel Wade wants to brief you at 800, and then you'll have the rest of the day to acclimate and prepare. Sarah followed him through the base, past soldiers going about their morning routines. Some glanced at her with curiosity. Female pilots weren't rare anymore, but they weren't common either, especially in forward areas. They stopped at a small containerized housing unit, a CHU in military parlance. It was barely big enough for a bed, a locker, and a small desk, but it was private and air-conditioned. "Home sweet home," Foster said. "Mess hall is 2 buildings over. Briefing room is next to the operations center. If you need anything, just ask." After he left, Sarah unpacked her gear and lay down on the narrow bed. She'd slept on the transport flight, but it had been fitful, interrupted by turbulence and the constant noise of the engines. Here, at least, it was relatively quiet. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't stop working. The mission briefing was in 2 hours. She'd learn the specifics then, target locations, threat assessments, rules of engagement. Until then, all she could do was wait. And Sarah had never been good at waiting. At 7:45, she made her way to the operations center. The briefing room was small, with folding chairs arranged in front of a large screen. Already present were Colonel Michael Wade, a no-nonsense officer in his 40s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his entire career in combat zones, and 3 other pilots, 2 Air Force captains and a Marine major. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel Wade said, standing to shake her hand. "Welcome. I've heard good things about your storm flying." "Thank you, sir." "These are the other pilots on this mission. Captain Ryan Burke, Captain Jennifer Cho, and Major Sean McNeil. You'll be flying as a package, 4 aircraft, coordinated strike." Sarah shook hands with each of them. Burke and Cho seemed friendly enough, professional. McNeil was harder to read, his expression neutral, his handshake firm but brief. "All right, let's get started," Wade said, moving to the screen. He pulled up a satellite image showing a mountainous region. "This is your target area, about 60 miles south of the Turkish border. Intelligence has identified 3 surface-to-air missile sites in this valley. Each site has between 4 and 6 missile launchers, radar systems, and defensive positions." He zoomed in on one of the sites. Sarah could see the launchers positioned on flat ground, camouflage netting draped over them. "These are SA-24 missiles, Russian-made, highly effective against aircraft at all altitudes. They've already taken down one of our drones and nearly hit a coalition helicopter. We need to eliminate them before they take out manned aircraft." Wade pulled up another image, this one showing weather patterns. "Here's the complication. The region is experiencing unseasonable weather, high winds, dust storms, low visibility. Most of our aircraft can't operate effectively in these conditions. But A-10s can. That's why you're here." He looked directly at Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, you'll be lead on this mission. You have more experience flying in extreme weather than anyone in theater. Burke, Cho, and McNeil will follow your lead." Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. Lead pilot meant making the critical decisions, coordinating the attack, ensuring everyone got home safely. "What's the threat level, sir?" Burke asked. "High. In addition to the SAM sites, we expect small arms fire, possibly man-portable air defense systems, MA and PADS. The terrain is also challenging, narrow valleys, sudden elevation changes. You'll need to fly low to avoid radar, but not so low you hit a mountainside." Wade switched to a tactical map. "The mission profile is straightforward. You'll fly in from the north, following this valley, then split into 2 pairs. Mitchell and Cho will take the western sites. Burke and McNeil will take the eastern site. Time on target is 600 tomorrow. You'll have 30 minutes to complete the strike before enemy reinforcements arrive." "Rules of engagement?" Sarah asked. "Weapons free on military targets, but be careful. There's a village about 2 miles from the target area. Civilians are present. If you see non-combatants, do not engage." The briefing continued for another hour, covering communication protocols, emergency procedures, extraction plans if someone went down. By the end, Sarah's head was swimming with details, but she'd absorbed all of it. She'd been doing this long enough that mission planning was second nature. After the briefing, the 4 pilots walked together to the flight line. Sarah's A-10 sat in a hardened aircraft shelter, its ugly, utilitarian design somehow beautiful to her eyes. The maintenance crew had done their job well. The aircraft looked ready for war. "Hell of a machine," McNeil said, running his hand along the fuselage. "I flew Hornets for 10 years, and I still think the Warthog is the toughest bird in the Air Force." "Army," Sarah corrected with a smile. "This one's Army." "Right, I forget you flyboys. Sorry, fly people share the airspace with us." They spent the rest of the day reviewing the mission plan, walking through scenarios, practicing coordination. Sarah was impressed by the other pilots. They were professional, skilled, and took her leadership without question. McNeil, who she'd initially found hard to read, turned out to have a dry sense of humor that kept the mood lighter than it might have been otherwise. That evening, Sarah ate dinner in the mess hall, then returned to her CHU. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept running through the mission profile, identifying potential problems, planning contingencies. At 200, she gave up and got dressed. She walked to the operations center, where a skeleton crew monitored communications and surveillance feeds. She poured herself coffee and sat watching the monitors, seeing the thermal images of the target area, the heat signatures of the missile launchers glowing white against the cool desert night. Tomorrow, she'd destroy those launchers. Tomorrow, she'd fly through hostile airspace, dodging missiles and gunfire, relying on skill and luck in equal measure. Tomorrow, she might die. But tonight, she was alive, drinking bad coffee in a war zone, doing the job she loved. At 4:30, Sarah walked to the flight line for pre-flight checks. The sky was still dark, stars fading as dawn approached. The air was cool now, but by midday it would be scorching. The other pilots arrived shortly after, and together they went through their checklists. Sarah climbed into her cockpit, settled into the familiar seat, ran her hands over the controls. Everything felt right. At 5:30, they received clearance for takeoff. One by one, the 4 A-10s taxied to the runway, formed up, and took off into the pre-dawn sky. Sarah took the lead position, the other 3 aircraft staggered behind and to her sides. They climbed to 5,000 feet, turned south, and headed toward the target. The sun rose behind them, painting the desert gold and orange. On her radar, Sarah could see the terrain ahead, the flat desert giving way to foothills, then to mountains. "Flight, this is Hog 1, she said over the radio. "Weather ahead looks worse than forecast. Heavy dust, visibility less than 2 miles. Stay tight and follow my lead." "Copy, Hog 1, Burke responded. "Right behind you." They flew into the dust storm like they were flying into a wall. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Sarah relied on her instruments, trusting the GPS, feeling her way through the sky. This was what she'd trained for. This was what she was good at. 20 minutes later, they reached the target area. Sarah descended to 1,000 feet, then lower, following the valley floor. On either side, mountains rose like teeth. "Flight, this is Hog 1. Target area ahead. Burke and McNeil break right on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark." The 2 aircraft peeled away, heading toward the eastern missile site. Sarah and Cho continued toward the western sites. "Hog 3, stay on my wing," Sarah said. "We're going in hot." They cleared a ridgeline, and suddenly the target was ahead of them. The missile launchers, exactly where intelligence had said they'd be, still covered with camouflage netting. Sarah armed her weapons. "Hog 3, I'll take the northern launchers, you take the southern ones." "Copy, Hog 1. Sarah lined up her shot, checked her targeting computer, squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon roared, sending a stream of 30 rounds into the target. The launchers exploded in brilliant orange fireballs, secondary explosions tearing them apart. She pulled up, banking hard to avoid the debris, and lined up on the second set of launchers. Another burst from the cannon, another explosion. "Hog 1, I'm taking ground fire." Cho's voice was tight. Sarah looked over and saw tracers arcing up toward Cho's aircraft. She banked hard, lining up on the source of the fire, a defensive position with what looked like an anti-aircraft gun. She fired, and the position disappeared in a cloud of dust and fire. "You're clear, Hog 3. Continue the attack." They worked systematically, destroying the launchers one by one. Sarah felt the familiar focus that came during combat, everything else falling away, her entire world narrowing to the task at hand. "Hog 1, this is Hog 2. Eastern site is destroyed, we're clear." "Copy, Hog 2, we're almost done here." Sarah lined up on the final launcher, fired, watched it explode. All targets destroyed. "Flight, this is Hog 1. Mission complete, form up and head home." They climbed out of the valley, back into the dust storm, heading north. Sarah felt the adrenaline starting to fade, exhaustion creeping in. And then her warning system screamed, "Missile lock." "Flight, this is Hog 1. I've got a SAM launch." She looked down and saw the smoke trail, a missile climbing toward her fast. She threw the aircraft into a hard dive, popping chaff and flares, trying to break the lock. The missile followed, adjusting, closing the distance. This was it. This was how it ended. Sarah pulled the stick back hard, climbing now, trying to get the missile to overshoot. The G-forces pressed her into the seat, made it hard to breathe. The missile exploded 50 feet behind her. The shockwave hit the aircraft like a hammer, throwing it sideways. Alarms blared. The right engine was on fire. Hog 1 is hit. Right engine fire, losing altitude. Hog 1, this is Hog 2. I see you. I'm on your wing. Sarah fought the controls, trying to keep the aircraft stable. The fire was spreading. If it reached the fuel tanks, the aircraft would explode. She had to make a decision. Eject now, while she's still at altitude, or try to nurse the aircraft back to base and risk burning up if the fire got worse. Everything she'd learned, all her training, all her experience, came down to this moment. She made her choice. Flight, this is Hog 1. I'm staying with the aircraft. I think I can make it back. Hog 1, that's negative. You need to punch out. Not yet, not yet. She activated the fire suppression system. The fire in the engine died, but the engine was gone, useless. She was flying on one engine now, barely maintaining altitude. The border was 30 miles ahead. If she could make it that far, she'd be over friendly territory. Rescue would be possible. 20 miles, 15, 10. The aircraft shuddered, more warning lights. The left engine was starting to fail now, overheating from the extra load. Come on, girl, Sarah whispered. Just a little farther. 5 miles. The border, she'd made it. And then the left engine exploded. The aircraft dropped like a stone. Sarah pulled the ejection handles. The canopy blew away. The rocket seat fired, launching her into the sky. The parachute deployed, and suddenly she was floating, the burning wreckage of her aircraft tumbling toward the desert below. She hit the ground hard, rolled, came up dizzy and disoriented. Her ribs hurt, her shoulder hurt, but she was alive. She looked up and saw Burke's A-10 circling overhead. Hog 1, this is Hog 2. I see your chute. Rescue is on the way. Hang tight. Sarah activated her emergency beacon and settled in to wait. She was alone in the desert, miles from friendly forces, but she was alive. And the mission was complete. Sarah sat in the sand, her back against a boulder, watching the horizon. The sun was climbing higher now, the temperature rising. Her survival kit contained water, a radio, a pistol, and supplies for 3 days. She wouldn't need 3 days. Rescue would be here in hours. At least that was the plan. She checked her injuries. Her left shoulder was badly bruised from the hard landing, probably sprained but not broken. Her ribs ached when she breathed deeply. Otherwise, she was intact. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving her shaky and exhausted. She pulled out her radio and switched it to the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Hog 1. I'm down but safe, requesting immediate extraction. Static crackled in response. She tried again. Any station, this is Hog 1. Do you copy? More static, then faintly. Hog 1, this is Hog 2. We copy. Rescue bird is inbound, ETA 30 minutes. Stay put and stay safe. Copy Hog 2. I'm not going anywhere. 30 minutes. She could manage 30 minutes. Sarah scanned the area around her. The desert stretched out in all directions, broken only by low hills and scattered rocks. No sign of enemy forces, no vehicles, no movement, just heat and sand and silence. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The mission had been a success, all the missile sites destroyed. But she'd lost her aircraft, the machine that had carried her through so many missions, that had felt like an extension of her own body. It hurt more than she'd expected. She thought about her mother waiting back home. She'd promised Ruth she'd come back safe. She'd kept that promise barely, but she was alive. That had to count for something. Time crawled. Sarah drank water sparingly, knowing she might need it if the rescue was delayed. She kept her pistol close, just in case. The desert looked empty, but that didn't mean it was safe. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The rescue helicopter should have been here by now. Sarah keyed her radio again. Hog 2, this is Hog 1. Where's my ride? There was a long pause before Burke responded. Hog 1, we've got a problem. The rescue bird took enemy fire and had to turn back. They're sending another one, but it'll be at least another hour. Sarah's stomach sank. Copy that, I'll wait. An hour, that was manageable, probably. She settled back against the rock and closed her eyes, trying to conserve energy. The heat was oppressive now, the sun directly overhead. Even in the shade of the boulder, she was sweating. 45 minutes later, she heard it, the distant rumble of engines. She opened her eyes and looked toward the horizon. 3 vehicles were approaching, small dots in the distance, getting larger. They were moving fast, kicking up plumes of dust. They weren't American vehicles. Sarah's hand closed around her pistol. She moved behind the boulder, making herself as small a target as possible. She keyed her radio, her voice urgent. Hog 2, this is Hog 1. I've got enemy vehicles approaching my position. 3 trucks heavily armed. Where's my extraction? Burke's voice came back immediately. Hog 1, rescue bird is still 20 minutes out. You need to evade. There's nowhere to go. It's flat desert for miles. Hog 1, you need to move, now. Sarah looked around. Burke was right. Staying here meant getting captured or killed. But running across open desert with a sprained shoulder and bruised ribs meant the vehicles would overtake her in minutes. She was out of good options. She made a decision. She grabbed her survival kit, left everything else behind, and started running toward a cluster of rocks about 200 yards away. It wasn't much cover, but it was better than nothing. The vehicles closed in. She could hear them now, the engines loud in the desert silence, shouting voices they'd seen her. Sarah reached the rocks and dove behind them just as the first shots rang out. Bullets pinged off stone, kicking up chips and dust. She pressed herself flat, trying to make herself invisible. More shooting. The vehicles stopped about 50 yards away. Men piled out, at least a dozen of them armed with rifles and wearing mismatched military gear. Not regular army, probably militia or insurgents. They spread out, moving toward her position. Sarah checked her pistol, 15 rounds against 12 men with rifles. She was good, but she wasn't that good. One of the men shouted something in Arabic. Sarah didn't speak the language, but the tone was clear: surrender. She stayed silent. More shouting, then a burst of automatic fire, bullets chewing up the rocks above her head. They were getting closer. Sarah's mind raced. She could surrender, hope for the best, but female American soldiers captured by insurgents rarely fared well. She could fight, take as many with her as she could, but that was suicide. Or she could stall, buy time, hope the rescue helicopter arrived before they killed her. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice low. Hog 2, this is Hog 1. I'm pinned down, at least 12 hostiles. I need that extraction now. Hog 1, the bird is 15 minutes out. Can you hold? I'll try. Sarah shifted position, peered around the rock. The men were 40 yards away now, moving cautiously, using cover. They knew what they were doing. She aimed carefully and fired twice. One man went down, clutching his leg. The others scattered, taking cover. That would slow them, but not stop them. More shouting, more gunfire, a sustained barrage that forced Sarah to keep her head down. When it stopped, she looked again and saw that they'd closed the distance to 30 yards. They were going to overrun her position in minutes. Sarah fired again, forcing them back. But she was down to 10 rounds now. She couldn't keep this up. She thought about her mother, about the promise she'd made. She thought about Colonel Brennan and Major Grady, about Emma and Jake. She thought about all the missions she'd flown, all the lives she'd saved. Was this how it ended? Alone in the desert, out of ammunition, waiting for the inevitable? No, not like this. Sarah made a decision. She grabbed her radio and switched to the emergency frequency, broadcasting to anyone who might be listening. Any station, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell, call sign Hog 1. I'm under heavy fire at grid coordinates. She rattled off her position. I'm alone, low on ammunition, and about to be overrun. If anyone can hear this, I need immediate assistance. She didn't expect a response. The rescue helicopter was still minutes away, too far to help. The other A-10s had returned to base to refuel. She was on her own. But she'd done everything she could. If this was the end, at least she'd go down fighting. The insurgents moved closer. Sarah could see their faces now, could see the determination in their eyes. They wanted her alive or dead, and they weren't going to give up. She had 6 rounds left. She'd make them count. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, not the helicopter, something else, something familiar. The unmistakable roar of a GAU-8 cannon. She looked up and saw dropping out of the sky, wings wobbling, smoke trailing from its right engine. It was flying impossibly low, maybe 200 feet off the ground, lined up on the insurgents' position. The cannon fired. The desert erupted in a line of explosions, dirt and fire and bodies thrown into the air. The surviving insurgents scattered, running for their vehicles. They pulled up hard, banking away, then came around for another pass. Sarah stared in disbelief. Who the hell was flying that aircraft? Burke and the others had returned to base. There shouldn't be anyone out here. The A-10 made its second pass, destroying one of the vehicles with a burst from the cannon. The remaining insurgents piled into the other two trucks and fled, disappearing into the desert in a cloud of dust. The A-10 circled once more. Then the pilot's voice came over Sarah's radio. It was a woman's voice, confident and calm. Hog 1, this is Hog 5. Sorry I'm late. Rescue bird is 2 minutes out. Hang tight. Hog 5, who is this? There is no Hog 5. There was a pause, then a chuckle. There is now. Colonel Brennan sent me when he heard you were in trouble. Said you might need someone who knows how to fly through hell and come out the other side. And then Sarah understood. This was another pilot from her base, someone who'd volunteered to fly halfway across the world to save her. Hog 5, you just saved my life. That's what we do, Hog 1. That's what pilots do. The rescue helicopter appeared, a Black Hawk flying low and fast. It touched down 50 yards from Sarah's position, and she ran for it, ignoring the pain in her ribs and shoulder. Hands pulled her aboard, and the helicopter lifted off, climbing away from the desert. Sarah looked out the window and saw the damaged A-10 following them, smoke still trailing from its engine. The pilot was heading back to base, nursing the wounded aircraft home. Just like Sarah had done during the storm. Sarah made it back to the forward operating base, was checked by medics, debriefed by intelligence officers, and finally allowed to rest. Her injuries were minor: bruised ribs, sprained shoulder, dehydration, nothing that wouldn't heal. The next day, Colonel Wade called her to his office. Captain Mitchell, I've reviewed the mission reports. The strike was a complete success. All 3 missile sites destroyed, no friendly casualties except your aircraft. Thank you, sir. More importantly, your leadership during the mission was exemplary. The other pilots all reported that you made decisions under pressure that saved lives and ensured success. I was just doing my job, sir. You did more than that, and I understand you had some excitement during your extraction. Yes, sir, Hog 5 arrived just in time. Wade nodded. Captain Jennifer Martinez. She volunteered to fly out here when she heard you were down. Hell of a pilot. I'd like to thank her personally, sir. You'll get your chance. She's waiting outside. Wade opened the door and a woman in a flight suit stepped in. She was in her 30s, Hispanic, with short dark hair and a confident smile. Captain Mitchell, meet Captain Martinez. Sarah stood and extended her hand. You saved my life out there. Martinez shook her hand firmly. You would have done the same for me. That's what pilots do. They talked for a few minutes, swapping stories, forming the kind of instant bond that comes from shared danger. Then Wade dismissed them both, and they walked out into the afternoon sun. I heard about your storm flight, Martinez said. Flying through a Category 3 to save your mother, that's legendary. Sarah smiled. It's just what needed to be done. Same reason I flew out here. When Brennan said you were down, I didn't even think about it. I just volunteered. They reached the flight line, where Martinez's damaged A-10 sat in a hangar, maintenance crews swarming over it. Think she'll fly again? Sarah asked. Oh, she'll fly. These birds are tough. Take more than a little engine damage to ground a warthog. Sarah looked at the aircraft, at the battle damage, at the scorch marks from the cannon fire. It looked like hell but was still intact. Toughest machines in the sky, she agreed. 2 days later, Sarah flew home on a transport. She was met at the base by Colonel Brennan, Major Grady, and a small crowd of other pilots and personnel. Welcome back, Captain, Brennan said, shaking her hand. Good work out there. Thank you, sir. I've put you in for another medal, the Distinguished Flying Cross. You earned it. Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also something else, a sense of completion. She'd proven everything she needed to prove. She was one of the best. Everyone knew it now. I appreciate that, sir, but honestly, I'm just glad to be home. Understandable, take a week off, rest, recover, then report back for your training assignment. Sarah spent that week with her family. She stayed with Dave and Susan, played with Emma and Jake, sat on the porch with her mother and talked about everything and nothing. On the last night before she returned to base, Ruth made dinner, pot roast with potatoes, Sarah's favorite. They ate together, the whole family, laughing and telling stories. After dinner, Ruth pulled Sarah aside. "I'm proud of you, baby girl, not because of the medals or the missions. I'm proud because you're a good person who uses her strength to help others. I learned that from you, Mom. Maybe, but you made it your own. You became something I never could have imagined." They hugged, and Sarah felt tears threaten again. She'd come so close to never having this moment, to dying in the desert and leaving her mother with only memories. But she'd made it, she'd survived. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby." Sarah returned to base the following week and threw herself into her new role as head of the Advanced Weather Flying Training Program. She trained pilots to fly in conditions that would ground most aircraft, passing on everything she'd learned over 20 retry H-continue hours of flying. Major Grady became one of her strongest allies, often sitting in on her training sessions and learning alongside the younger pilots. The dynamic between them had shifted completely, from condescension to genuine respect. 3 months after her return, Sarah stood in front of a classroom of 12 pilots, a mix of Army and Air Force personnel, all eager to learn from the pilot who'd become something of a legend. "Flying in extreme weather isn't about being fearless," she told them. "It's about respecting the danger, understanding your aircraft's capabilities, and knowing when to push forward and when to turn back. The goal is always to complete the mission and get everyone home safely." One of the younger pilots, a lieutenant fresh out of flight school, raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you flew through a Category 3 storm to save someone?" Sarah smiled. "I flew through dangerous weather to locate a trapped civilian, yes, but I didn't save anyone alone. The fire department, the paramedics, the hospital staff, they all played crucial roles. Remember that, we're part of a team. The best pilots know when to rely on others." The training sessions were intense. Sarah took the pilots up in every kind of weather: thunderstorms, high winds, dust storms, anything that would prepare them for the worst conditions they might face. She taught them to trust their instruments, to read the signs nature provided, to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. By the end of the 3-month program, all 12 pilots had passed their advanced weather certification. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction watching them graduate, knowing she'd prepared them for whatever challenges they might face. 6 months after the Syria mission, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the base. She was in her office, reviewing training schedules, when her phone rang. "Captain Mitchell, you have a visitor at the main gate. A civilian. Says her name is Ruth Mitchell." Sarah's heart jumped. "My mother, send her through. I'll meet her at the visitor center." She rushed out of her office and across the base. When she reached the visitor center, she found her mother standing by the window, looking out at the flight line where several A-10s were parked. "Mom, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" Ruth turned and Sarah saw that she was smiling, tears in her eyes. "Everything's fine, baby. I realized I've never actually seen where you work. I've never seen your aircraft up close, and I thought it was time I did." Sarah felt her throat tighten. In 20 years of service, her mother had never visited her at a base. She'd always said it would make her too nervous, seeing the machines Sarah flew into danger. "Are you sure we don't have to?" "I'm sure. Show me, Sarah. Show me your world." Sarah signed her mother in and gave her a visitor badge. Then she walked her slowly across the base, pointing out different buildings, explaining what happened in each one. Finally, they reached the flight line. "There she is," Sarah said, pointing to an A-10 in one of the hangars. "My bird." They approached the aircraft, and Sarah ran her hand along its armored hull. The maintenance crew had given her a new plane after the one she'd lost in Syria, but it felt the same: solid, reliable, powerful. "Can I touch it?" Ruth asked. "Of course." Ruth placed her hand on the aircraft, her fingers tracing the panel lines. "It's so solid, so strong." "It has to be. The A-10 was designed to take damage and keep flying. They call it the Warthog because it's ugly but tough." "I don't think it's ugly," Ruth said softly. "I think it's beautiful because it brought you home to me." Sarah helped her mother climb up to look into the cockpit. Ruth peered at the instruments, the controls, the ejection seat. This is where you sit. This is where I belong, Sarah said. They stayed at the hangar for an hour, Sarah explaining different systems, telling stories about missions she could discuss, helping her mother understand the world Sarah lived in. As they walked back to the visitor center, Ruth took Sarah's hand. I was so afraid of this place, she admitted. So afraid of what you do, but seeing it, understanding it. I'm not as afraid anymore. I'm still worried every time you fly, but I understand now why you do it. This is who you are. Thank you for coming, Mom. This means more than any medal. I should have come years ago. I'm sorry it took so long. You're here now, that's what matters. A year after the Syria mission, Sarah stood once again in Colonel Brennan's office. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Brennan was smiling, and beside him stood General Hayes, the officer who'd recruited her for the mission. Captain Mitchell, Hayes said, please sit down. Sarah sat, curious about what this meeting could be about. I'll get straight to the point, Hayes said. Your performance in Syria was exemplary. The mission was a complete success, and your actions during the extraction, holding off enemy forces until help arrived, demonstrated courage and tactical thinking of the highest order. Thank you, sir. Based on that performance and on Colonel Brennan's recommendation, I'm offering you a promotion to Major and a new assignment. We're forming a specialized unit focused on combat operations in extreme environments. We need someone to lead it, someone who's proven they can fly through anything and make the hard calls under pressure. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of unit, sir? A mix of Army and Air Force pilots, all trained in extreme weather operations. You'd be based here at Lewis McChord, but you'd deploy worldwide as needed. It's a chance to shape the future of combat aviation, to train the next generation of pilots who can operate when others can't. It was everything she'd worked for: recognition, respect, a chance to make a real difference. I'm honored, sir, I accept. Brennan stood and extended his hand. Congratulations, Major Mitchell, you've earned this. The promotion ceremony took place 2 weeks later. Sarah stood at attention while General Hayes pinned the gold oak leaves of a major onto her uniform. Her mother, her brother, and his family watched from the audience. So did dozens of pilots she'd trained, flown with, and inspired over the years. When the ceremony ended, Sarah was swarmed with congratulations. Major Grady embraced her. You've come a long way, Mitchell. Remember that briefing when I was a condescending ass? Sarah laughed. Vaguely, it's been a while. You've made me a better pilot, a better officer, thank you for that. Captain Martinez had flown in from her new posting to attend. The legend continues to grow. Major Mitchell has a nice ring to it. I couldn't have made it without people like you. Thank you for saving my life out there. Like I said, that's what pilots do. That evening, Sarah took her mother to dinner at a quiet restaurant off base. Just the two of them, mother and daughter, celebrating not just the promotion but everything that had led to this moment. Your father would be so proud, Ruth said, raising her glass. I wish he could have seen this. He's watching, Mom, I know he is. They talked about the past, about the future, about everything Sarah had accomplished and everything still to come. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly at peace. She'd proven herself, she'd earned respect, she'd saved lives and inspired others. But most importantly, she'd stayed true to who she was, a pilot who flew through storms, literal and metaphorical, because it was the right thing to do. 2 years later, Sarah's specialized unit had become one of the most respected in the military. They'd conducted successful missions in hostile weather conditions around the world, saving lives and completing objectives others had deemed impossible. Sarah stood in the hangar on a cold November morning, watching her team prepare for a training exercise. 12 aircraft, 24 pilots, all trained to her exacting standards. Her radio crackled. Major Mitchell, this is Tower. We have an emergency situation developing. Civilian aircraft down in the mountains, survivors reported, but weather conditions are severe. Category 2 winds, heavy snow, 0 visibility. Search and rescue is grounded. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was what they trained for. Tower, this is Mitchell. We can fly, give me the coordinates. Major, conditions are extremely dangerous. Tower, that's why we're here. We're the ones who fly when no one else can. Give me those coordinates. There was a pause, then, coordinates transmitting now. Good luck, Major. Sarah turned to her team. They were already moving, sensing the urgency, preparing for launch. "Listen up," she called out. "We've got civilians down in the mountains. Weather is bad, Category 2 winds, 0 visibility. This is what we've trained for. This is why we exist. Who's with me?" Every hand went up. Sarah smiled. "Then let's go save some lives." 20 minutes later, Sarah's A-10 lifted into the stormy sky, 11 other aircraft following in formation. They flew into the clouds, into the wind and snow, toward people who needed help. As Sarah climbed through the turbulence, she thought about the young woman who joined the army 24 years ago, desperate to prove herself. She thought about all the battles she'd fought, not just against enemy forces, but against prejudice, doubt, and her own demons. She thought about her mother, safe at home, probably watching the news and worrying. She thought about all the pilots she'd trained, all the lives she'd saved, all the storms she'd flown through. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The radio crackled. "Major Mitchell, this is Rescue Control. We're tracking you on radar. Be advised, conditions are deteriorating." Sarah's voice was calm, confident, the voice of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Copy, Rescue Control. This is Hog 1, we're going in." She flew into the storm, and 12 aircraft followed her because they trusted her, because she'd proven herself time and time again. Because when things got impossible, Major Sarah, Hog, Mitchell was the pilot everyone wanted in the lead. They thought the storm had taken her once. But storms don't take pilots like Sarah Mitchell. They just make them stronger,